Uh-oh. You're gonna need to stay back and continue.
Esto es Comando Z. Aquí Leis Culver en otro episodio más de Comando Z Podcast. Seguimos en la Ciudad de México y hoy tengo la super oportunidad de tener a Rahul Sen, and we will actually change the topic and the language of the interview today. So we will be in English. Hi, welcome Rahul.
Hi Leishi, thank you so much. Hello everybody.
I'm super excited to have you here on the podcast. Like, this is my first time in Mexico City. I think it's your first time or not?
My first time in Mexico City and my first ever podcast, so very excited.
We have a newbie. This is super cool. Mm-hmm. So, can you tell to the audience who are you, what you do for a living? I know that you are a designer, but just like getting a little bit more like on...
Sure, I'd love to. I'm Rahul Lindberg Sen, and I'm traveling to Mexico City all the way from Stockholm in Sweden, where I live. I've been in Sweden for roughly 10 years, and currently I'm working for the last 4.5 years as the head of UX for mobile experiences within Volvo Cars. And prior to that, I worked at Spotify for 5 years, and before that at Nike and through other agencies like RGA. So I've had a very wide, diverse time in my career. And my first time in any part of the world south of the United States. So very, very excited. And my first podcast.
Yes. I feel so excited. I'm the first one. Okay, so one of the things that I really want to actually bring to the audience is that you have the opportunity to work with multicultural teams. Mm-hmm. And that is really important in order to like expand the knowledge of the way that we design. Like, sometimes we are really designing in terms of localization for a particular country, but when you have the experience to work like across different like cultural themes, it's really like nurturing the things that you can bring to the design. So I would love to talk about how you work to take into consideration each point of view of how this practice nourish the design practices.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think in all the places I've worked, especially at Volvo Cars, diversity and inclusion are the only way to succeed at what we do, because the things we make are not only localized, as you said, Leishi, to various languages, but are actually being used by humans of every country in the world and often of very diverse stages in their life, and different gender identities, different cultural identities, different personalities. And so the best we can try and do is bring that kind of a flavor into the team by hiring people from various walks of life. And so what we try to encourage is obviously celebrating each other's culture through the design process, through the everyday of being as a team. We celebrate a lot of cultural festivals with just Chinese New Year, and I have 4 colleagues on my team who are of Chinese origin, so we celebrate that. We celebrate Diwali, we celebrate festivals from all over the world to make it feel like everyone is together as one big home. We also celebrate diversity of opinion, which is, I think, something which comes with the package, right? Like, you want extroverts and introverts to feel safe. You want people of various political views to feel safe to share them openly while creating the products we want to make. And so, I hope I answered your question a little bit, but at least that's what we think about when building a diverse and inclusive team at Volvo.
I would like to add, in terms of my experience, I've been working with international companies for a little bit of a while now, but when I start, it was really like weird for me, like having another person that was not from Puerto Rico, because it's not so common. We are a small island in the Caribbean. And I remember the first time, and I know that she's listened to this podcast and seen this video. My first encounter with a person, it was one of my best friends now. She's from France. And I remember that she said to me, it was like, hi, nice to meet you. And she was like, I'm Natalia and I'm from France. I was like, good joke. And she was like, no, I'm from France. It was like,
for real?
Really? Are you here in Puerto Rico from France? And that is something that we need to like expand our minds when you are meeting a person that is completely different from you, and you have different perspectives, different ways of seeing the life. But most important in our field, how they approach to design with the culture that they have in mind.
Absolutely, it's such a great point, and I think like we carry our cultural heritage. You're from Puerto Rico, I'm from India originally. We're all like displaced in the world. We're all trying to find our identity in a displaced or even in our local setting, and in these situations, celebrating the cultural differences that we share is so important to acknowledge, because not everyone looks like you, thinks like you, feels like you, and I think that's important as we like your realization that someone from France can actually be in Puerto Rico.
Exactly.
Right? Like we have that happen all the time. It's like, oh yeah, you're Indian, but your name is Swedish. How did that work? And I'm like, yeah, I'm married to a Swede. I have 2 Swedish children. I am Swedish, but I'm of Indian heritage. So I bring my examples of Indian craft, of Indian culture and storytelling. Like we have, like Puerto Rico and Latin America, you have centuries of history from where I come from and where you come from, and Mexico City as well. And I think that's what makes it interesting to be in the design profession, is to think beyond the dry double diamond design process and actually understand local flavor and understand stories of myth and mythology or traditions. Like in India, you touch people's feet to show respect, and that's completely alien in Sweden, but we talk about it because brings us together. It makes us feel like I've never been to your country, but through you I experience what it's like to be in your shoes, in a sense. So
empathy is really
empathy, yeah.
for us, like how we can actually translate empathy through design. One of the things that I would like to actually share, taking into consideration how expand the topic, it's actually like come and see like the podcast itself. We want to show in case how the design is living in the countries that we travel. And one of the things that for me, it was really surprising here in Mexico is like the use of color. Like it's really impressive. Like I know that sounds like a little bit silly, like, okay, Leishi, yeah, color, of course, Latino, But the reality, when you start actually living and traveling, you can see the difference on design in some small aspect that it blows your mind. Like we have colors in Puerto Rico, we are Caribbean in terms of island, but the way that they use it here, it's just so impressive. Like in India, for example, do you have like something that you can share in terms of design in particular?
Yeah, it's the same as you mentioned. I felt at home immediately when I came to Mexico City, because it's like there's full of red chili colors and yellows and blues, and I was like, this is like a breath of fresh air. And it's the same for me coming from India. We have a lot of traditions of architecture that are rooted in thousands of years of cultural history. We have 50 different languages being spoken in India. We have cuisine that's diverse. So it's really a melting pot of centuries and centuries of immigration. And so we are kind of a diverse country to begin with. And then when I bring that with me to Sweden and I see my fellow Indian colleagues or Chinese colleagues back where I work, I just want to make sure that they feel that their culture is why we want to be together, not that we want to displace you and make you what you're not, but you are that culture that you represent in a sense.
One of the things that I would like to share with the audience that they learn from us is like how you can actually bring this diversity and inclusion when you have a brainstorming session. Like how you can actually tackle that and bring that as a part of innovation.
Yeah, and I think it's brainstorming is what we do for a living, don't we, as a design craft, and it's brought about through the mindset of divergent thinking, convergent thinking, but it's what you put into it, to your point, that makes it interesting, especially when we're solving a variety of problems. You don't want all of them to be the same solution. And to me, the way we achieve that is when we actually extract the uniqueness in our perspective from each other. So that includes cultural diversity to start with. Extracting stories, lived examples, like you said a story about how it felt for you to come from Puerto Rico, or your French friend in Puerto Rico. Those are the examples that make the process real, right, and local in flavor. That's one. The second one is, to me, the diversity of opinion. Because if everyone had the same views, if everyone said yes to the same ideas, there's no friction, there's no creative tension. And I think the best ideas come in the innovation process when there is opposition, when there is friction, tension that grinds the dirt into diamonds, right? And the third one is diversity of personalities, where some of us are extroverted, some of us are introverts, and we prefer a different way to express ourselves. And what I try to achieve in the facilitation sessions I run is to make sure that everyone feels like they have their own way of expressing. So sometimes giving people space to write their thought if they're not good at thinking at the top of their head is one example where, you know, I at least look for the silent voices in the discussion to be heard as well. To say, hey, we're going to take 5 minutes to think through our thoughts and write them down so that everyone gets a chance to express, not just the ones who are quick to express opinion verbally, but also those who have fantastic ideas but feel a bit shy or a little bit more, you know, reluctant to express it.
It's just like when you have like I studied in my master education, and they explain to you like people learn from different ways, and you need to provide different ways to people to educate themselves.
Yeah.
So it's the same when you have a brainstorming session. It's really important that every voice it can be heard.
Yeah.
Another thing that is really important and I want to bring to these conversations is intersectionality. And when you have, like as you mentioned, when you have a team that everyone, it looks the same, comes from the same background, have the same type of ideas, it will be just like a yes section. And it's really important to have that in mind. Like you can have like 5 men in the room, but everyone can point a different point of view just because of the context from they came from. Can be one a male, white, but can be gay, and you have another male that is Latino but also live in Europe.
Yeah.
And that is intersectionality. And people sometimes it comes like it's just one way to see it, not like this diverse dimension of the human being.
I think that's such a beautiful thought you're extracting in the conversation, because if all of us thought exactly the same, looked exactly the same, it's a dry, uninteresting world we would live in, wouldn't we? And so to celebrate that, you need to draw out what we call in the innovation process key differences, or there are things that we will generally agree with, right? Like there are things that we can look at trends or general opinions and say, yep, more or less everyone in the discussion agrees on topic A, B, and C. But maybe topics D and E would, because one is of a different sexuality or a different gender identity, would be completely different. Some of us would think like this, some of us would think like that, and those polarities is what makes the topic interesting to discuss. And so what I think I try to enable through my team, through everyone I work with, is a safe space to have that discussion and facilitate that discussion in a way that draws out the opportunities to make things better, and also identify the risks of the discussion to make sure that we're not all saying yes and just writing stuff on post-its and walking away, but actually having the real meaningful debates that we need to have.
Yep. We know the value of having a diverse team, but I would like that people that maybe listen to this interview that are managers, leaders, what will be something that you can highlight that will be a benefit from having a diverse team?
I mean, but straightforwardly, the more diverse your team is, the better impact it will have on your business. So what we have coached ourselves within Volvo to understand, and at Spotify and at previous places, is diversity means, it's not a marketing term that we use to make different cultures belong in a team, but actually ends up with a better product. So for me, the impact of diversity is felt in the product you put out there. And if the more diverse the opinions are, the more impact it will have, because a variety of people will feel like it came from them. It was designed for them, right? And very often we've missed that in the past. We've hired teams that look exactly the same, that have the same gender identity, that have the same opinion, and the output looks like the people that made it, and it only resonates with them. And that's a huge failure in the world of oneness, in a sense. I
want to actually bring a life story. It will be a come and see story. I would like to do come and see to that particular part of my experience. I remember one time that I was on a company, I will not say the name. I was on a company that they will try to have a campaign for the LGBT community. And I remember that I said to everyone that somebody from the people that are doing the brainstorming are from the LGBT community. And it was no, but we know that this is okay because we know the colors of the flag and we are checking it out, the content. It was you need somebody from the community to actually run this campaign.
Yeah. That was your story of undoing.
Yeah. And actually, that's one of the things that I want to bring also to people. You will expand so much on the market that you can reach if you have diverse team. As you mentioned with the point of view.
Yeah.
Like it's not the same like having like sort type of like idea of how the things work. That somebody actually is living and having that experience that explain to you how it works.
Yeah. I mean, we live in most cases, we live in democratic, highly plural societies where people are of various income levels, variation is the spice of life, right? And so to answer your question, that is the kind of mindset that we want to foster in the innovation process, is to try to look for that diverse opinion when it is usually silent, it is usually hidden. I mean, before we gave a voice to those who were voiceless, their viewpoints would be missing from the innovation process. And so I think our job as design leaders and facilitators, more importantly, is to create that safe space to look, not to make people uncomfortable about diversity, but to actually create a place that is fair and equal and safe for everyone to feel heard, to feel seen. Because ultimately when the product goes out into the market, it feels like it came from a diverse team.
Yep.
A lot of a fun example, I'm sure all of us have tried AI, the photography tool that you put in pictures and it gives you something in return. AI algorithm looked awful for my photographs. I don't know if it happened to you as well, but I fed it 20 photographs of my face, and I hoped that it would give me some kind of nice AI generated portrait. It looked nothing like me, because the people who are coding that algorithm are inherently biased by their own, I mean, we are all guilty of our own biases, are we not? And
the standards.
That's the standard, and there's nothing to feel ashamed about. It's just who we are, and what the best we can do is to acknowledge that biases exist.
That's the first step.
Right.
Acknowledge
it, and then understand how can I help make it better to overcome that bias. And I don't think that AI as a community has gotten there yet. Obviously, it'll take some time. But it was funny to see that first mirror of artificial intelligence through the lens of diversity, because it's not there yet. It's still very much tailored to a certain, cultural demographic that looks as one. And so my wife is Swedish, and all her AI photographs looked amazing because that's the algorithm. And it's everywhere in what we make.
Now I will try one from my side.
Please do. See. I'm curious to see what that looks like. I'm sure it's going to be an interesting test for the diversity that you and I are talking about.
Yep.
To see how far AI has pushed it.
So I want to shift a little bit the conversation. I can be hours and hours talking about diversity. That's something that it's really into me. But I want to take the opportunity to learn from you, from your experience, like working with Spotify and Volvo. How was the shift from digital to physical products in terms of the design field for you?
Yeah. Wow, it was a huge shift. I mean, and I started my career in industrial design and in interaction design. So designing software for physical devices was where I started. And then through RGA and Spotify, I really started working on 100% digital product.
Gotcha.
And that got me understanding how agile works and how fast increments happen. And then coming to Volvo, that whole thing gets turned on its head, because Volvo is a 100-year-old company that's known for safety, that's known for excellence in industrial design and engineering of the cars, but is trying to understand how software plays a role in that. So it's a big jump from Spotify to Volvo, to be blunt.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like, you are working actually on the mobile team,
yes,
but it's like a physical product, but it's with tech. Like, how you do the merge?
I think it's an interesting question, and we talk about it a lot at work. It's one of these active conversations that we as a design community are trying to, overcome. The hardware cycles are much longer, right? So a car takes 5 years to go from first sketch to implementation, and when you have it in your hands.
Okay, wow.
An app we release every 3 to 4 weeks. And so there's a big difference in how to connect dots in a concept when the horizons or roadmaps are so stretched on an elastic timeline, so what we try to do, and my good friend Jorge Furuya, who couldn't be here, he's from Mexico City. He leads the team for car UX and is adjacent to mobile where I work. And we collaborate on this topic constantly because his team has to focus on delivering the user experience for the car and is bound by a certain, let's say, frequency of how we work. When do you check for decision points? It's much more considered because the timeline is much longer.
Gotcha.
Whereas in mobile design or in web design, where my colleagues in web also are working on various products, the delivery horizon and the double diamond that we talk about in the design process is much more compressed. So you're doing sprints in 2 or 3 weeks and then boom, the product is out there, the feature improvement is out there. Whereas with the car, it's much more packaged. You have to deliver it as a whole, because the car at the moment is still engineered very much as a job that has a certain deadline, and then once you do it, engineers work on it, and then it comes out from the factory. That will change in the future. Software will get updatable in the car, but for now it's very much a bit of difference in how we work. Like the car increment, as we call it, is 13 weeks. And a software increment in mobile is 2 weeks.
Wow, the difference is huge.
Yeah, right?
I mean, in terms of timing, like.
And the specification of detail is also, you have to think it through for the car, because the app you can quickly adjust if you make a mistake. You can push an update and it's done. Whereas a car is the second most expensive thing you usually buy as a customer. Yeah, after your home. And so we have to put a lot of thought into every single detail, and the level of consideration that my colleagues in car UX have to put into it have to be really, really airtight before they ship it. Whereas web or mobile, you could kind of correct yourself on the fly.
So I really want to do a question that actually is not from my side, from my dad's side, that I'm doing this question for you. I imagine that in Volvo, has to be sort of type of communication between the things that you are doing on digital side with the car actually designed, right?
Yeah.
So how it goes, that experience?
It's an enormous challenge to keep things. There's so much work that happens behind the scenes to make everything that Volvo or a brand like Volvo does look and feel coherent. We have a web team that does online shopping, mobile team, car UX team that works on the car, retail systems teams that are working on all kinds of service design ideas for Volvo, and all of this is how the customer experiences Volvo. Not just when they're sitting in the car, but beyond the car. And it's a huge challenge to keep things aligned. So what we do as a team is we have a group that helps. It's called the guide team, and they help keep things aligned as a design system to make sure that the way that the car appears in the infotainment screen when you drive the car and how it appears in the app, there are common signatures, there are enough red threads in the design to feel as one family. And we are led by principals. We have about 12 design principles that I probably will have a little bit of a struggle to repeat here.
Don't worry.
But when we also have 5 UX principles, and principles are a great way, as you also probably know, to keep us aligned, even if we have very different goals, different processes. Like we were mentioning earlier, the car process is much more intense and detailed because it has to be, and the mobile and web processes can be a bit faster. Principles help create this consistency, this red thread where a user is sitting and watching the app that my team is working on and still feels like it's a part of the same family.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was my question actually, because sometimes do you feel like, and I see it, some campaigns you can see the ad, and when you actually acquire the product, it looks so weird, looks like can be old, or this is a new version. In your perspective, you are talking about how fast it moves your side versus the car. So how that came together because of the design system.
Absolutely, it's a design system. And to go back to your earlier question, one framework I use a lot, which I'd like to offer to your viewers as well, is the horizon model, which is inherently flawed because nothing is static. But have you worked with the horizon framework previously?
No, please explain it. Yeah.
So horizons is basically, how far ahead in time are you thinking? So typically McKinsey came up with this model, and we need to readapt it because it's a little more complex. But Horizon 1 is something that's typically 12 months away.
Okay.
Whereas Horizon 2 may be 2 to 3 years out, and Horizon 3 or more is 5 years away. And as you can imagine, the further out in time you think about an idea or a concept, the more variability there is. It's like so many changes that even the last 2 years our lives have gone through. The further out you go, the more uncertainty there is. And so horizon thinking is what we try to bring about, where the car takes 3 years.
Exactly, the car is the farthest.
It takes much more time. Infrastructures where retail systems work, like traffic infrastructure, 10 years. Road safety systems, 20 years, right? So you have to look at an idea and break it down into how many horizons are you trying to combine to achieve the end goal. And then the guide team helps keep that visually aligned. But there's so much under the hood that also has to make sense, or the experience is very curtailed to a mobile experience or a car experience. But when you start to think omni-channel, as we are doing, you need to understand how elastic is your idea, how far in time is it going to be, and try to project into that future a little bit more. Because if you create something now, let's say a car UX, and you're not looking 5 years out, by the time the car is shipped, the UX is already obsolete.
Exactly.
So our team is doing a fantastic job there to try and project, understand trends. Like we just had a share out from CES in Las Vegas at Volvo UX, where we're trying to understand how is the industry adapting and what kind of new things are going to happen, so that we can make the things we create last longer and feel timeless when they come out and not dated, which is a
You
risk.
guys are designing for the future.
We're trying to, and it's really hard. And there are lots of amazing companies out there that are doing a great job too. So it keeps us honest.
Sorry that I'm adding questions, but I have questions for myself that I know the audience will have it too. And now I'm thinking, like, in my experience, I work with design systems just specifically for digital products.
Yes.
And I know that it would be like typography, colors, tone and voice, marketing way to see the product itself. But how it works when you have something that is physical but also digital?
Oh, that's a good one. I was actually going to ask that question for myself, but you asked it, so thank you. That's an interesting challenge, right? Like, so if you are familiar with Volvo, there's a very interesting detail in the front headlight, which is called Thor's hammer. And Thor's hammer is literally shaped like the hammer of Thor, and it looks like we were talking about earlier. It talks about Scandinavian mythology. It talks about Odin and the Norse mythology and how it's part of Scandinavian heritage, where Volvo comes from. That's one way to understand detailing, but when you ask that question, that's a really difficult one, because how do you make details in a user experience that combines physical and digital when all of their paths to emergence are different? I think the best we try to do is, like I said, principles-based design approach, and also signatures. We try to look for digital signatures, or what we call key experiences in what we create, that combine physical touch points, digital touch points, and more importantly, in the new world of Volvo that I'm learning myself about, a lot of things happen in neither. Like service design, there's no screen involved. It's how your customer receives their car, or how they return their car for service. That's all part of the experience.
Exactly.
And I think the old world model, to also answer your father's question, the old world model would say, yeah, here's Thor's hammer, and beautiful signature is one of my favorite details ever. But we have to also ask ourselves, what is that signature experience when we talk about non-physical, non-digital things either? And we're trying to figure that out. It's not, I can't say we found an answer just yet, but we are working hard to try and understand across the journey on various touch points, what would those signatures feel like?
I really love like the concept, because I was thinking on myself, like a design system is just like I would say, like, in this way, don't get me wrong, but I would say like a course, like a book that you have everything together, and you can learn and live that through that specific like context basically, and the content that is there. But when you have something that is so different, like physical and digital, how those merge together, like as you mentioned, like the experience, you don't have any touch point, you don't have like anything that you can feel related. Like you haven't the experience on when you enter to the car and you feel like the seat, and it's like, oh, it's really comfortable. But how you can translate comfortable through digital?
physical comfort versus psychological comfort, right?
Exactly.
Right. So that's the kind of and that's why diversity, to go back to our first topic, matters, because when we work in those kinds of projects, which don't happen that often, to be honest, we usually work on car projects and mobile projects or products, and then very often we find that there are bridges. The one that you're describing is the biggest of all bridge builders, where you have exterior designers, interior designers of the car, who speak a very different language of metal, surfaces, sculpture, working together with designers who are working on service thinking, mobile design, car UX designers. So that's like a diversity of design skills.
Exactly.
That you need to know how to speak a common language before you can even design again, right?
That's the point. Like you have so many designers, but have different languages, just like a diverse and different cultural things.
Yes. And if you've created the right kind of conditions for diversity and inclusion, you go beyond culture and gender and personality and start thinking about diversity of craft as well, right? Because it's important for let's say an exterior designer in a company like Volvo to perhaps understand what UX is about, and vice versa. Because to be effective in these cross-functional experiences, we need to understand each other's craft. We need to have respect and empathy for one another, and know that there are different processes at play sometimes. Like the way you sketch a car physically with a pen is very different than how you do it with our design thinking process, right? So it's an interesting challenge, and I think we have a long way to go before we can really get better and better at it.
It's really beautiful how we are talking about, and I can be hours about talking this, but I'm just imagining, like, one of the things that we like to do with Come and See, like we talk about design in a big picture, and we have interviews just like food design, and people sometimes they tell me like, why you interview people that are not designers, and I do the question like, what is a designer for you? Because like somebody that works with color, with textures, with lines, with composition, that is a designer. And that is the thing that is beautiful, that you can have different type of crafts, but you can still speaking about design.
I love that. I love that thought. And I actually, there are so many references to play with here, right? Because in my talk at Design Matters, one of the things I wanted to say, but I won't have time, so it's a skipped slide that you're just asking me about, is what is my strength? And one of the things I enjoy doing is lateral thinking, which is what you just did here. Design is what we do, but I like connecting it to music. I like connecting it to cooking or fine dining. I'm going to eat at a fine dining restaurant tonight, and I'm so excited about it, because to me, it's all of these lateral threads in our approach where I'm like, step back as a designer and look at a musician and how they work. There's so much synergy. Like you tune your instruments, you find sounds that are sometimes noise, and then you try to process that into music. The same is in a way highly simplified, but when you're doing the cooking process, you're looking for ingredients in the forest, and you're trying to go, is this edible? Is this a leaf that I can eat? And then you try to combine them as recipes into meals. And I think that's what designers do as well. I mean, we try to find ideas, we try to find patterns, combine them into, like a musician would, compositions, and then wonder, does that sound like music or is it noise when it comes to life as a customer experience?
Every time that I have an interview, I try to do a little bit of stalking.
Stalking?
And I saw, like that. I'm so sorry. And I was actually seeing a conference that you do, like a speaker session, that I really like, that you explain to the audience the concept of design relationship sauce. I was so into it, and I was like, people need to listen to this.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you to stalk me for that. I gave that talk in, 2012 or 13, when I was working at Spotify, and I had this idea in a very data-surrounded experience to come up with something called relationship sauce. Because what I was missing in the discussion was, what is the recipe? I mean, we're talking about ingredients, but does it all come together in some kind of harmony, or are we missing that? And that's what I called, in a funny way, relationship sauce, because all of us are in relationships, and how we went from being individuals to being together with someone that we love had a process. And I think products have that same process too. Any app or product that we love to use has a hidden relationship sauce in it. And I think we need to understand it better, not only as designers, but as product managers or engineers, if we can agree on what the relationship sauce is of the recipe, the dish tastes better, right? You can change salt into some different kind of salt, but at least you know that that's part of the recipe that you're trying to create. So I wrote this talk. It's on Medium if you'd like to read it. It's way old, so thank you for bringing it back into my life. I also gave it a few talks on YouTube, so just search for relationship sauce and you'll see what I was talking about. But really the idea was, how do you go from dating someone that you don't know into being in a lasting relationship with them?
And how that converts to how we think and design products.
Yes.
That was the thing that blew my mind, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like,
thank you.
In my experience, like when I started the podcast, for me, it was like an opportunity to bring like an additional resource to designers. And in my mind, in terms of like assumptions, I was thinking like this will be a resource for people that are starting their career.
Yeah.
And then when I start actually doing events and start like having conversation with my colleagues, tell me like, you know what? I really want to be into the trends. And when some episodes that you have, I can actually update myself. And it was like, wait a minute. This is like a different relationship that has the podcast with my audience. It's not only for people that are actually starting careers, it's for people that really want to like keep together and keep it with the trends and just be relevant with the topics that are passing in the design industry.
And in doing so, you evolved your podcast's relationship sauce, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the magic of that analogy. It's really not rocket science in a way. It's actually the opposite. It's dating science. It's what we do in our relationships. And we buy flowers. We try to understand the other person's needs, and we go, why did that person react the way she or he or they did when I did something? And that evolves your sauce. So it's not a static thing that you just keep as a finite object forever, but as you did with your podcast, it starts to evolve with you. And I think I'm an architect previously, and in that you would call it product personality, right? Like cars have smiling faces on them. Why? Because it makes it feel approachable. Buildings have like large doors. Even though the door is actually small, they give the illusion of large doors because that's product personality. It invites you in. And I think what I was trying to search for in that talk was, what does that mean for us as digital designers when it comes to relationship sauce? What is that thing that you are left thinking about? For example, you take a date, right? And you have a memorable date. And obviously, you've been married for some years like myself, so we've not dated for a while, but imagine we were dating again. And you had a great date. You would be thinking about why it was great. You would be thinking about a conversation you had, and it would leave you thinking and feeling certain things. That's what products do as well. When you have a great interaction with a meaningful product experience, it has that impact on our lives. Not always, but we try to, right? And that's when relationship sauce succeeds. When we are thinking, when designers are codifying the product they're making with that approach.
I really like how you put it together in terms of like Tinder profiles or relationships and dates. It is in that way. Like sometimes we need to actually put a personality to the product to even connect even more with our users.
Yeah.
So we have like a sort type of questions that are part of the podcast.
Yes.
And it's like an ongoing questions that we do because come and see, actually the point of the podcast is learning from mistakes. That's what's the come and see, right? So can you tell us like sort type of horror story? You don't need to say any brand itself. Like it's just like explain a little bit. What was your mistake in that story and what you learned from that?
That's a great question, and I'm very, very, actually the first time I spoke at Design Matters in 2017 in Copenhagen, the topic was embracing failure. So I'm like a PhD in losing, in failing. I love it. So thank you for asking the question. The one I'll offer you is, I think the mistakes I made in creating a diverse and inclusive culture, because I didn't have that bias. I mean, I had my bias, and even though I meant well, I didn't mean anyone harm. I assumed that my personality was everyone's personality, and it was a mistake of immaturity, of inexperience, where I was like, I'm just going to make everyone jump in and swim because I know how to swim, so everyone else should. And what that did was frustrate my team. The people I was working with had a different mental model of what they felt they needed in order to succeed. and I failed, and I acknowledged that failure repeatedly, and I'm very self-critical, so I kind of understood that might have been how I want to work, but it's not how the people I want to involve want to work too. It's an assumption I made that was wrong, and so what I tried to do was lean into my weak spots and go, well, how can I? Yeah. So what I tried to do is understand my weak spots, and now compensate for them, because everyone doesn't have to think like I do. What I would do in a situation is not what everyone else needs to do. So I try to become the other, and that's a learning I carry with me, is how do I become structurally sound, process oriented, because that's not my strength. My strength is being comfortable in chaos, perhaps, right? And not everyone else shares that. They need structure, they need predictability and cadence. And so what has evolved through my failure has been my ability, I hope, to understand that I need to make them, the people I'm working with, feel protected, and that comes from protecting them from myself sometimes and my madness or lack of structure.
So you have a mirror and you talk to yourself, hey.
Oh, well, like, don't be like this guy. Like, try to be more comfortable and approachable for them, what they need. And I think that it wasn't natural at first, because I'm, as a personality, someone who leads, like, I think this is how I would do it, so I try to pull people with me, and that failure taught me that I need to take a step back and understand how to make it more inclusive for others.
That's a great advice, and actually you open my eyes. Like, sometimes we talk about a lot of empathy, and we don't practice to ourselves, and the way that we project to others too.
Yeah. So
it is. Thank you for that, actually.
Thank you for asking. And I think you have to be kind to yourself in that empathy. I mean, empathy begins with kindness, right? It is to have a strong opinion, to have desire and ambition, and I don't think empathy to me doesn't mean like, let's not try to achieve impossible things. It's about saying, how do we carry each other on that journey? And it starts with being kind to yourself, because we are inherently flawed people. Everyone that we're working with is flawed. Sorry, just spoiling the suspense. No one's perfect. And what we can best understand is, what is our weakness? What is our strength? And I talk about this a little bit in my presentation tomorrow with you. So just trying to be kind to yourself, and then trying to be kind to the people you're working with, without trying to be charitable. And there's a big difference. Like, charity is just trying to be nice and cool, but to be kind, you have to really understand how the other person's feeling, and go, that person's feeling is not how I feel, but I have to understand how to make that person feel better. And if that means rectifying my own behavior, so be it,
We are almost on the last question of the podcast, and I really want to have like the conversation for 4 hours more.
I'm here.
So what would you copy and paste? Tell us, like, what do you think like designers need to copy in order to just like have good things in the industry? Like, if you can say something that you would like that people copy from design.
So my background, and a lot of people, if I rewind the clock 20 years ago, I was in theater, and theater taught me empathy. It taught me how to become someone else. Because when you're character acting, you have to become the character, or you're not being genuine. I wish I could copy paste that way of thinking into our design process, and I try to do it with body storming sessions, with improv theater sessions, to get us away from our boards and sketchbooks and become comfortable with our bodies and act out interactions a little bit more. So I would try to bring that approach more into body storming, storytelling in the way we work, and I used to do that in theater. I'd like to copy paste it a bit more into design practice.
It's so fascinating what are you talking about. Like, every time that I have like a sort of a conversation with a designer, it tells like, remember, you are not the user, but you know what? If you use like the acting model, you can feel also like related to your like character in some way, so you can feel what is going on. So it's really surprising. Thank you for that advice. Now I will start. I remember that I started some part of my career like doing theater too, and it's some of the things that I missed really.
That's lovely to hear. We share that in common. And for me,
give me 5.
I mean, Thank you. And one example, I know we're out of time, but one example as a brainstorm I've done in previous sessions is to turn off the lights in a room and make everyone lose their sense of sight, and then try to find the settings in your phone with your eyes closed. How do you do that? And in order to go through that exercise, you really feel how it is to not have vision, which we take for granted. And so that's empathy.
Yep.
Thank you for asking the question.
Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge with my audience, Rahul. Has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Leishi. It's been my pleasure too.
So it has been everything for today y será hasta la próxima, amigos.